The three Chinese companies that secretly control every screen you own. Pick up your phone. Look at the screen. Not at the logo, at the screen itself. The glass, the pixels, the glow. Now answer one question. Who actually made it? If you said Apple or Samsung or Sony, you are almost certainly wrong. Your Samsung TV? Samsung did not make the screen. Your Sony Bravia? Sony did not make the panel. Your iPhone? Apple designed the chip. Apple wrote the software. Apple engineered the camera. But the display, the one thing you stare at more than anything else in your life, that came from a factory in China. And the company behind it? You have never heard of them. There are three companies: BOE, TCL, CSOT, HKC. Together, they produce more than 60% of all the screens on Earth. Phone screens, laptop screens, TV panels, car dashboards, airport departure boards, hospital monitors. All of it. Now, here is the part that should stop you cold. Samsung has its own display division, a whole separate company called Samsung Display. But Samsung Electronics, the one that sells you Galaxy phones and QLED TVs, buys screens from these three Chinese companies and puts them inside Samsung products. The brand you trust is buying parts from companies you have never even Googled. BO, the biggest of the three, posted revenue of 198 billion yuan in 2024. That is roughly $28 billion. Bigger than AMD, bigger than Spotify and Snapchat put together. BO holds over 90,000 patents. CSOT operates 11 production lines across multiple countries. Hefei just went public at a $25 billion valuation. These are not scrappy startups. These are industrial giants hiding in plain sight. And this is the story of how they got there. How three companies from China quietly took control of the single most important component inside every device you own. How Japan, the country that invented the display industry, lost everything. How South Korea, the country that dominated it for 2 decades, is retreating. And how a government-backed industrial strategy funded by hundreds of billions of dollars turned 3 unknown manufacturers into the invisible backbone of modern electronics. Every number in this video comes from industry reports, court rulings, financial filings, and trade commission decisions. Nothing here is speculation. So let us get into it. What is actually behind the logo on your devices? Start with Samsung. If you own a Samsung TV, and it is not one of the premium OLED models, the LCD panel inside it was made by a Chinese company, not Samsung. Samsung Display shut down its entire LCD operation in June 2022. Then, 3 months later, they sold every single LCD patent they owned to TCL CSOT. So when you buy a Samsung LCD TV today, what are you getting? A Chinese panel, Korean software, and a Korean logo. The screen itself comes from China. And it goes further. In 2026, Samsung Electronics signed a deal with TCL CSOT for 15 million OLED panels. Not LCD, OLED. These panels go into the Galaxy A57 and Galaxy S FE phones. Why would Samsung buy OLED from a Chinese competitor instead of from its own subsidiary? Because CSOT quoted them 20% less. Samsung compared the two prices and picked the cheaper one. Sony is the same story, just quieter. Sony stopped making its own display panels years ago. For mainstream LCD TVs, the ones that actually move off shelves, Sony buys panels from BOE, CSOT, and AU Optronics. Only the premium OLED models use panels from LG Display or Samsung Display. But the most surprising case is Apple. BOE became the #1 MacBook panel supplier in 2025. 51% of all MacBook display orders went to a single Chinese company. For iPhones, BOE has been shipping OLED panels since 2021, and the volumes tell the story. 18 million panels in 2021, 32 million in 2022, 41 million in 2023, 43 million in 2024, roughly 50 million projected for 2025. BOE even got approved to produce LTPO LED panels for the iPhone 17 Pro. That was a first. No Chinese company had ever cracked Apple's pro-tier supply chain before. Apple did pull back for its newest 2026 products: the iPhone 18 Pro, the foldable iPhone, the OLED MacBook Pro. For all of those, Apple went exclusively with Samsung Display and LG Display. BOE had quality problems at one of its factories in late 2025, and Apple decided not to gamble on its biggest launches. But for the hundreds of millions of other Apple products, the screen still comes from BOE. One more detail that might stick with you. Every 98-inch LCD TV panel in the world comes from TCL CSOT. Every single one. Samsung, TCL, Hisense, does not matter what name is on the box, the panel inside is CSOT. For 100-inch screens, only 2 companies on Earth can make them: BOE and HKC. If you want a TV 90 inches or larger, Chinese-made panels are not one of your options. They are your only option. Market share at that size is approaching 100%. So how did this happen? How did 3 companies that most people have never heard of take over an entire global industry? The answer starts in an unexpected place: Japan. Japan built this industry from scratch. LCD technology was commercialized by Japanese companies. Sharp made the first large LCD TV factory. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, if you wanted a great screen, you bought Japanese. Sharp, Panasonic, Sony, Toshiba, Hitachi. These were the names that defined what a screen could be. And then, one by one, they all fell. Sharp was the pioneer. In 2009, the company opened the world's first 10th-generation display factory in Sakai, Japan. A colossal investment, a monument to Japanese manufacturing. But the factory barely ever turned a profit. It bled money for years. By 2016, Sharp was so deep in the red that Taiwan's Foxconn bought the whole company. And in September 2024, that Sakai factory went dark. Sharp walked away from LCD TV panels for good. Japan Display had an even more dramatic arc. In 2012, the Japanese government essentially forced a merger. It combined the display divisions of Sony, Toshiba, and Hitachi into one entity called JDI, a national champion, a last stand against Korean and Chinese competition. The result? 11 consecutive years of losses. Not a single profitable year. Constant layoffs, constant restructuring. Always 1 quarter away from being delisted. By 2025, JDI shut down its LCD factory and halted OLED production. Some of its manufacturing equipment was bought by HKC, one of the very Chinese companies that helped push JDI off the cliff. Panasonic, simply left, stopped making LCD panels in 2019, closed the business entirely by 2021. No drama, just an exit. Step back and look at the wreckage. Sharp, JDI, Panasonic, three of Japan's most important technology companies, all gone from the display business within a few years. Japan did not just lose market share, it lost the entire industry it had created. The country that commercialized LCD no longer makes a single LCD TV panel. The last Japanese TV panel factory was Sakai. It is a closed building now. One number tells the whole story. Around 2015, JDI and Sharp together supplied about 70% of the LCD screens used in iPhones. By 2023, that had collapsed to roughly 20 million panels a year, and only for the cheapest iPhone SE. When Apple switched the SE to OLED in 2025, those orders went to Samsung Display, LG Display, and BOE. Japan went from 70% of iPhone screens to zero in under a decade. After Japan fell, there was one more dominant player standing: South Korea. Samsung Display and LG Display ran the display world through the 2000s and 2010s. Samsung owned smartphone OLED. LG owned TV OLED. Together, they shipped nearly half of all LCD TV panels in the mid-2000s. Korea took what Japan built and made it bigger, faster, sharper. But Korea had a crack in its foundation. Both Samsung Display and LG Display had built factories inside China. Cheaper labor, closer to the Chinese consumer market, generous local incentives, smart business at the time. But it also meant Chinese engineers were working inside Korean-designed facilities, learning the processes, watching the technology up close every single day. And then the three companies arrived. Not with better products, not with some breakthrough invention, they came with something harder to fight: scale, patience, and a government that was willing to lose enormous amounts of money for a very long time. The playbook was simple and ruthless. BOE Technology Group started in 1993. Roughly 2,600 workers from a state-owned vacuum tube factory in Beijing pooled their resources to create Beijing Oriental Electronics Group. In its early years, BOE was irrelevant, a small outfit producing outdated components while Japanese and Korean companies ran the world. Nobody in the industry gave them a second thought. The company had roots in China's military electronics ecosystem. It grew out of a state enterprise that manufactured vacuum tubes for military and industrial use. This was never a garage startup. From its very first day, BOE existed within a framework of government support. January 2003 was the turning point. BOE bought the flat panel display division of Korea's Hynix, a unit called Hydis, for $380 million. Through Hydis, BOE suddenly had real LCD production lines. Second generation, third generation, 3.5 generation. Actual manufacturing infrastructure. The kind of capability that would have taken a decade and billions to build independently. What happened next is where the story gets uncomfortable. According to Korean court records, BOE transferred roughly 4,000 core technologies from Hydis back to Beijing. Key researchers were relocated to China. Within a few years, BOE had built its own factories using everything it extracted from Hydis. And Hydis? It went bankrupt. A Korean court found BOE responsible for the company's failure. What remained of Hydis was sold for almost nothing. In South Korea, this case is still referenced as a textbook example of technology extraction through acquisition. But the Hydis deal was just the spark. The fuel was government money. From 2010 to 2021, BOE received $3.9 billion in direct government subsidies. That averages to about $325 million per year, just handed over. In 2023, BOE received $532 million in subsidies. Its total profit that year was $350 million. The subsidies were larger than the profit. The government was paying BOE more than BOE was earning. Direct cash was only one channel. Local governments in China can cover up to 85% of the cost of constructing a display factory. Across the industry, the state provides 50 to 70% of investment costs through subsidized loans, equity stakes, free land, and built-out infrastructure. There are even programs that cover 100% of recruitment costs for hiring foreign engineers. The total numbers are almost absurd. Over 20 years, China channeled roughly 4 trillion yuan into its display sector, about $550 billion. BOE alone has spent over 700 billion yuan in capital expenditure since 2003. CSOT has spent roughly 300 billion yuan since 2009. A specific blueprint emerged, and it has a name: the Hefei Model. In 2008, the city of Hefei offered BOE 6 billion yuan to build a major LCD factory. The city provided land, energy, interest subsidies, and financial backstops through state-owned investment platforms. A later project, the Generation 10.5 line in Hefei, cost about 40 billion yuan total. The city put up roughly 18 billion of the 22 billion in equity. In practical terms, the government built the factory and handed BOE the keys. Every other city in China saw this and wanted the same deal. Province after province competed to attract display factories. Each offer got more generous than the last. For the cities, the math worked. A single large panel factory generates thousands of jobs, pulls in dozens of component suppliers, creates entire industrial districts. Schools, housing, logistics networks, all of it follows one factory. The result was an eruption of manufacturing capacity that nobody else could match. By 2024, China held over 70% of global LCD production capacity. And because so much of that capacity was funded by government capital rather than private investment, Chinese manufacturers could price panels at levels that no privately funded competitor could survive. Build the factories with public money, produce at a scale nobody can match, sell below cost for years if necessary, wait until competitors run out of money and close their plants, then buy whatever is left. That was the formula, and it worked. First on Japan, then on Korea, now the second company, CSOT. CSOT stands for China Star Optoelectronics Technology. It was created in 2009 as part of TCL, the Chinese TV brand you have probably seen in every electronics store. CSOT is different from BOE because it is part of a vertically integrated machine. TCL makes panels through CSOT, builds TVs around those panels, and sells them to you directly. Control the components, control the cost, control the shelf price. By 2025, CSOT operated 11 production lines and 6 module factories across China and India. Total investment, over 260 billion yuan, roughly $36 billion. CSOT was also an aggressive acquirer, and the deals it closed tell the story of Korea's retreat better than any chart. In 2020, CSOT bought Samsung Display's LCD factory in Suzhou. In September 2022, it purchased every LCD patent Samsung Display owned. Think about that. Samsung, arguably the most technologically advanced display company on Earth, sold its entire LCD knowledge base to a Chinese competitor. That is not a sign of strength. That is a surrender. Then, in 2024, LG Display put its last remaining LCD factory on the block, located in Guangzhou, China. CSOT won the bid at about $1.5 billion. LG had poured roughly $3 billion into that facility over the years. They let it go for half. With that single transaction, both Korean display giants had fully exited LCD manufacturing. Samsung left in 2022, LG in 2025. Korean LCD production went to zero. After the LG acquisition, CSOT's factory lineup grew to 2 Generation 6 lines, 4 Generation 8.5 lines, 1 Generation 8.6 line, and 2 Generation 10.5 lines. Its share of large LCD production jumped from roughly 19% to nearly 23%. CSOT is also placing a massive bet on what comes next. In October 2025, the company broke ground on the world's first Generation 8.6 inkjet printing OLED factory in Guangzhou. A $4 billion wager on a technology that could rewrite the economics of OLED. Standard OLED production uses vacuum evaporation, a process that wastes expensive organic materials and depends on equipment from a single Japanese supplier, Canon Toki. Inkjet printing could slash material waste by 2/3, break that dependency, and cut production costs by 15 to 25%. If it works at scale, China will not just own LCD, it will have a structural cost advantage in OLED too. Today, CSOT makes panels for Samsung's flagship 98-inch 8K TV, OLED panels for Samsung Galaxy A-series phones, and supplies Xiaomi, which accounts for more than half of CSOT's smartphone panel shipments. Add Vivo, Motorola, Huawei, Haier, and TCL's own products. The client list reads like a who's who of global electronics. The third company, HKC, and this one has the most unlikely origin story. HKC started in 1997 in Shenzhen. Its first product was CRT monitors, the heavy, boxy cathode ray tube displays that sat on desks in the late 90s. If you are old enough to remember those, you know exactly what I am talking about. The company that made those is now the third largest LCD TV panel manufacturer on the planet. HKC operates 4 Generation 8.6 LCD lines in Chongqing, Chuzhou, Mianyang, and Changsha. The Changsha factory cost 32 billion yuan to build and can crank out Ultra HD large panels with an annual output value above 15 billion yuan. Based on 2024 industry data, HKC ranks 3rd globally in LCD TV panel shipments, 4th in monitors, and 3rd in smartphone panels. It holds the number 1 spot in the world for 85-inch TV panels. Walk into any store, look at the biggest TV on the wall, and odds are the panel came from HKC. The company also developed a proprietary cutting method called MMG that squeezes more usable panel area out of each glass substrate. That efficiency is why TV brands call HKC first when they need ultra-large screens. The financial turnaround is remarkable. In 2022, HKC lost 1.4 billion yuan. 1 year later, it made 2.6 billion in profit. By 2024, that climbed to 3.3 billion. In the first half of 2025, revenue reached about 19 billion yuan, roughly $2.5 billion, with margins around 11%. In June 2026, HKC went public on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange at a valuation of roughly $25 billion. From CRT monitors in Shenzhen to a $25 billion IPO in under 30 years. HKC is also pushing consumer products under its own brand. In late 2025, it launched the world's first 1080 Hz gaming monitor, and it is gearing up to supply 98-inch TV panels directly to Samsung. You now know who these three companies are. You know how they grew. But there is a chapter of this story that would be dishonest to skip. Intellectual property. China's display industry did not rise purely on subsidies and clever strategy. There is a documented pattern of technology being taken without permission. Not allegations, court rulings. In July 2023, South Korea's Supreme Court convicted 12 executives and employees of TopTech, a major display industry supplier, for leaking core manufacturing technologies to BOE. In July 2024, a former Samsung engineer received a 6-year prison sentence for transferring approximately $25 million worth of OLED production secrets to parties in China. This was not a low-level leak. This was deep manufacturing knowledge, the kind developed over years and billions of dollars of research, walking out the door. In the United States, the International Trade Commission opened a case in 2023 accusing BOE and other Chinese firms of misappropriating Samsung Display's OLED trade secrets. In March 2025, the ITC found BOE had infringed 3 Samsung Display patents. In July 2025, the ITC went further, ruling that BOE had taken not just specific products, but the manufacturing process itself. The judge recommended a 15-year ban on BOE's OLED exports to the U.S. Samsung and BOE settled in November 2025.
BOE agreed to pay royalties. The ban never took effect, but the legal finding stands. The ITC determined that BOE's OLED panels were produced using Samsung Display's trade secrets. I want to be honest about both sides of this. BOE invested roughly $1.8 billion in R&D in 2024, about 7% of revenue. That is a substantial research budget by any global standard. The company holds over 90,000 patent applications worldwide and developed genuine breakthroughs, including the world's first commercially produced trifold OLED and tandem dual-layer OLED technology. Real innovation exists alongside documented IP violations. Both things are true. Pretending otherwise in either direction would be misleading. Now, let me pull back and show you where all of this has led. In Q1 2025, the top 3 LCD TV panel makers by shipment share were BOE at roughly 26%, CSOT at 20%, and HKC at 14%. Combined, 60% of the global market. Factor in smaller Chinese producers and the total crosses 70%.
China now controls about 76% of global display production capacity measured by area. More than 3 out of every 4 panels manufactured anywhere on Earth are made in China. In the smartphone panel market during the first half of 2025, BOE led with about 24%. Samsung Display was second at 16%, CSOT third, HKC fourth. 3 of the top 4 smartphone panel producers in the world are Chinese. Chinese manufacturers held around 70% of total smartphone panel shipments in 2024. That share is still climbing. And OLED, the premium technology that South Korea was banking on as its untouchable stronghold, is shifting too. In Q1 2024, Chinese companies passed Korean companies in small and medium OLED shipments for the first time. China reached 53%. Korea fell to 47%. For the full first half of 2024, Chinese OLED shipments hit 51% of the global total. Samsung Display remained the single biggest individual producer at 41%, but the combined Chinese output had tipped the balance. In 2024, something else happened for the first time. OLED smartphone displays outsold LCD smartphone displays globally. OLED captured 51% of the market. A few years ago, OLED was strictly a premium feature. You only got it if you paid top dollar. The Chinese producers cut flexible OLED prices so aggressively that phone manufacturers started putting OLED screens into mid-range and even budget devices. The technology Korea was counting on as a moat actually became the ladder Chinese companies used to climb over the wall. Lower OLED prices mean faster adoption. Faster adoption means more volume. More volume means Chinese producers grow even faster. The cycle feeds itself. The total display panel market is valued at roughly $150 to $167 billion as of 2025, with forecasts pointing toward $200 billion by 2030. China already accounts for more than half, and the share keeps rising. Fairness matters here, so let me give you the counter-arguments. Samsung Display and LG Display still hold the high ground in premium OLED. For Apple's most important 2026 products, the iPhone 18 Pro, the foldable iPhone, the OLED MacBook Pro, every panel comes from Korea. Apple spent years trying to bring Bow into its top-tier lineup. When it came time to bet on the products that define the company, Apple chose Korean suppliers. Samsung Display is still the single largest OLED company in the world. Its lead in premium flexible OLED and foldable display technology is genuine and significant. And context matters too. Japan used government support to build its semiconductor industry in the 70s and 80s. Korea did the same thing with memory chips and displays in the 90s. China followed a similar playbook. Bigger scale, more money, and some methods that crossed legal and ethical lines. But the underlying strategy of using state resources to build industrial dominance is not unique to any one country. It is a pattern that repeats across decades and continents. Still, the consequences are real, and they reach your wallet. Next time you're in a store, picture this: a Samsung QLED at $1,200, a Hisense next to it at $600. Different logos, different price tags, different commercials on the screen. But the LCD panel inside both of them may have rolled off the same CSOT or BOE production line. Maybe the same week. After LG Display sold its last LCD factory to CSOT, several tech outlets made the same observation. Samsung and LG LCD TVs now rely on the same Chinese-made panels found inside TCL and Hisense sets. The premium brand and the budget brand are literally looking through the same piece of glass. What you're paying extra for is the image processor, the operating system, the remote, and the logo. All real things, but not the screen. Samsung's own flagship 98-inch 8K TV uses a panel made by CSOT. Samsung could not produce that panel in-house if it wanted to. It no longer has the factories. The company that built its global identity around display quality now depends on a Chinese competitor to make the screen carrying the Samsung name. There is a risk angle to this as well, beyond consumer pricing. Remember the chip shortage during the pandemic? A handful of factories in Taiwan and Korea could not meet demand, and the car industry collapsed. Prices surged. Dealer lots sat empty. People waited months for vehicles. Now imagine a similar disruption hitting screens. The concentration is even more extreme. If BOE, CSOT, and HKC went offline at the same time, whether from a natural disaster, a geopolitical crisis, or a trade conflict, there is no fallback. Japan is out. Korea exited LCD. Taiwan is in niche mode. Nobody else manufactures LCD panels at scale. There is no plan B. This playbook is not confined to displays. The same pattern is unfolding or beginning to unfold in solar panels, EV batteries, and semiconductor packaging.
Massive state investment, explosive capacity expansion, pricing that undercuts everyone. Foreign competitors bleed market share and eventually quit. Concentration follows. And once a small number of companies in a single country control a critical supply chain, the leverage shifts permanently. Displays are the most complete case study. Japan is gone. Korea is retreating. Taiwan retreated to niches. 3 Chinese firms hold the majority of global output. That is the end state. Other industries are still in the middle of the same story. Some countries are trying to respond. India committed over $3 billion to display investments in 2025 through government incentive programs. Samsung Display and Dixon Technologies announced plans to build display assembly operations in India. South Korea is rolling out new subsidies and coordinating with the United States on technology strategy. The ITC cases against BOE are a form of legal pushback, but reality is stubborn. Building a competitive display industry from nothing takes decades and hundreds of billions of dollars. The Chinese companies have a 20-year head start and the backing of the world's second-largest economy. There is a human dimension, too. When LG Display sold its Guangzhou factory, when Samsung Display mothballed its LCD lines, those were not abstract business decisions. Tens of thousands of Korean engineers built careers in that industry. Many of those jobs are gone or threatened. In Japan, Sharp cut over 1,000 workers when the Sakai plant closed. JDI has been shrinking for years. The people who built this industry are watching it leave. Factory by factory, patent sale by patent sale. Meanwhile, BOE employs over 70,000 people. CSOT and HKC each employ tens of thousands more. The jobs did not disappear. They moved. They moved because a government decided 20 years ago that screens were a national priority, and it was willing to spend whatever it took. Here is the bottom line. For decades, the brand was the product. When you bought a Sony TV in the 90s, the panel was Sony's, made in a Sony factory, using Sony's own technology. The name on the front and the technology inside were one and the same. That world ended, gradually, then all at once. Factory by factory, patent sale by patent sale, the technology migrated. First from Japan to Korea, then from Korea to China, and now China holds the cards. Today, brands are a layer on top. The logo tells you who designed the interface, who tuned the colors, who answers the phone when something breaks. But the screen itself, the glass, the pixels, the backlight, belongs to someone else. Someone whose name you will never see on the box. Someone whose factory will never appear in a commercial. BOE, CSOT, HKC. 3 companies. 3 names that were probably new to you 30 minutes ago. They are inside the phone in your hand right now. Behind the screen, where you binge your shows, scroll your feed, video call the people you love. They sit between you and every piece of digital content you consume, and they are not slowing down. BOE is constructing new OLED factories. SOT is wagering $4 billion on inkjet printing technology.
Hake just landed a $25 billion IPO and is pushing into new segments. None of this is reversing. If anything, it is picking up speed. So the next time you walk through an electronics store, comparing Samsung and Sony and LG, remember this. The logo on the front is a brand. The screen behind it is a commodity. And that commodity comes from 3 sets of factories in Shenzhen, Wuhan, and Chongqing that you have never heard of, never thought about, and will never see advertised. Nobody printed it on the box. Nobody mentioned it in the ads. Nobody brought it up when you tapped your credit card. The brand on the front tells one story. The screen behind it tells another. A story of 4 trillion yuan, of Japanese pioneers who lost everything, of Korean champions forced into retreat, of 3 companies that quietly built the invisible infrastructure behind modern life while the rest of the world was not paying attention. That is the story behind every screen you own. And now you know. If this changed how you see the device in your hand, hit like. If you want us to crack open the supply chains behind chips, batteries, or cameras next, drop a comment. And subscribe so you are here for the next one. Because behind every logo, there is a story they are not telling you. See you next time.